Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Rita. My name is Emily, and today I'm entering my nonfiction era. Firstly, I want to apologize for the state of my shelves because I'm going through a bit of an unhaul crisis, so there's a lot going on back here and just don't look at it. What inspired me to make this video today is that the past two books I've read have been nonfiction. They've actually been nonfiction with red covers specifically, which I don't know what that says about me, but I liked both of them. And I really wanted an excuse to sit down and talk about them, one of them specifically. But I figured I can't just make a video talking about two nonfiction books with red covers, so I need to actually make a video about all my favorite nonfiction books from the past and the large number of nonfiction TBR books that I've acquired recently, because I do think I am actually legitimately, possibly entering my nonfiction era. And that does not mean I will only be reading nonfiction for the time being. That is not the case at all. I just think I'm going to be prioritizing it more and adding more to my TBR than I usually do because I've acquired more. And I also think that talking about my past favorites and upcoming TBR books are going to make me understand more my taste in nonfiction, because that's something I really haven't explored. So if you guys have any recommendations for any topics I possibly bring up, please leave them in the comments down below because I need help. So firstly, we're going to start by talking about, obviously, the nonfiction books with red covers that I just read. First, I read Crying at H Mart by Michelle Zauner, and I have been recommended this book by literally every single person I know. If you're one of them, thank you, because this was a gem. It's a memoir about Michelle Zauner, who's actually the singer for the band Japanese Breakfast, but it's not about her musical career. It's about her dealing with the grief of losing her mother and about how she lived during the time that her mother was dying and she had to take care of her. And it's sort of a reflection on their mother-daughter relationship from her teenage angsty years into her years as a caretaker. And I gave this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I think a lot of people love it and gave it 5 stars. I don't know why. For me personally, it didn't quite hit something that I haven't felt from other memoirs, especially on the topic of grief. And I know that's very subjective and it's going to be different for everyone. I thought the writing was a tiny bit repetitive, so that's kind of why I knocked off a star, but it was well written otherwise and had some interesting reflections, and it definitely will be very helpful for a lot of people. It's also a bit more unique because it comes from the perspective of someone who's half Korean, and the mother that is dying is Korean, so she's kind of grappling with that sense of cultural identity as well. Now, the next book I want to bring up is posing the risk of me going on an insanely long tangent, so I'm going to try to hone it in and not do that. The next book that I just read recently is Trust the Plan by Will Sommer. Now, this is gonna take some context. The full title is Trust the Plan: The Rise of QAnon and the Conspiracy That Unhinged America. So this looks like a QAnon book. I promise it's not. Let's zoom in on the subtitle there. The reason that I read this is because I, forever, have been fascinated by documentaries about, at first, like, incels and those type of people. Then I somehow, like, through these documentaries, shifted my way over into this documentary about Pepe the Frog. If you want to know the full details, I wrote an entire essay about this book and my experience with learning about all of these types of things on my blog, readem.org, so go check that out. I'll put the link in the description if you want to hear, like, the details, the interesting details. But basically, I went from those kind of documentaries to discovering that everything is linked to QAnon. When I was visiting a friend recently, she told me about the documentary Q Into the Storm on HBO, and that opened up a whole other side of things. Anyway, this book is about QAnon. It's written by one of the reporters who was featured in that documentary. He writes for the Daily Beast, and he is, like, the guy when it comes to writing about QAnon. He knows everything, and no one is looking into it at the scale that they should be. This book just chronicles QAnon specifically, but also just the idea of conspiracies and how dangerous they actually are and how unseriously the FBI and mental health organizations and just, like, general institutions take them. It's also just crazy filled with drama. Like, the story of it all is insane, especially the HBO thing, Q Into the Storm. Like, if you want the tea, if you want more of a mystery, watch that. If you want, like, the analytical breakdown, read this after. I'd also recommend watching it first so you really have, like, people's faces in your minds and then reading it, but these two go great hand in hand. Also, that documentary is from 2021, this is from 2023, so this has some updates. This has the whole effects of COVID situation going on, so, like, there's a lot to unpack. This was 5 stars, obviously, and this is really what has inspired this entire video to happen. Okay, so now we're gonna get into the section of just past nonfiction books that I have personally loved. And to stay a little bit on, like, the corruption side of things, I'm gonna put Special Agent next by Candace DeLong. Now, this book, I don't know if anyone in the entire world has ever heard of it or read it. I just found it on my mom's bookshelf, like, several years ago. It's written by a former member of the BAU, like, the Behavioral Analysis Unit that's literally in Criminal Minds, like, which I've watched 15 seasons of, right? So I had to read this, and especially because it's from a woman's perspective, I was very interested to know what the real life BAU was like, especially for a woman. The things that these FBI agents like legitimately do that are real. Like stakeouts are real. Going undercover is real. And I think that this book, the reason it stood out to me as especially good is that because it's from a woman's perspective, she also just talks about like discrimination in the workplace and also gives tips about every like victim she's learned from working in the BAU. Like she gives you safety tips, especially as a woman, which are legitimately helpful. And I have them like tabbed and I still remember them even though I read this so many years ago. We're gonna stick on the crime stint for now and move on to My Friend Dahmer by Durf Backdurf. That is quite a name, but it makes sense when you read the book. This is nonfiction despite the fact that it is a graphic novel and it is written by Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood best friend. The reason that I have this and got into this is that I had seen the movie and that had interested me in the Jeffrey Dahmer case, who is a serial killer if you don't know. And then in high school I wrote an entire research paper about Jeffrey Dahmer, so I needed to read this again. And there's actually another book I'll mention called A Father's Story by Lionel Dahmer, who is Jeffrey Dahmer's father. That book is very hard to get a hold of. I had to do like several interlibrary loans to get it, but it's very insightful because it has details that no other sources can give. And it's like somewhat controversial because, you know, is he telling the truth? Is he not? I kind of forget the details of what I believed and didn't because I wrote this paper many moons ago, but it had details that I needed that no one else had. Anyway, back to this though. This is easily accessible and the movie is also quite good, but this is just a crazy perspective. It has nothing to do with Jeffrey Dahmer being a murderer. It is only him in high school leading up to it. So it's kind of the signs that people may have missed and picked up on and maybe the preventative measures that could have taken place to stop him from becoming a serial killer. And this is a bit of a tangent, but I'm just gonna say it real quick because I wrote that entire paper about it and I'm passionate about it. I personally believe that Jeffrey Dahmer was kind of born as a murderer. I do think he could have been prevented from being a serial killer because his first murder happened years and years before any of the rest of them, and no one batted an eye, no one literally noticed anything happening at all. And there's just too much for me to talk about this for me to even attempt. But this is very interesting. I'm gonna leave it at that. It is disturbing, fair warning. Okay, so on a very different side of crime, we have Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This is a very narrative nonfiction story about Bryan Stevenson. This is also by Bryan Stevenson, the lawyer of the Equal Rights Initiative who saves people from death row who are actually innocent. And this has been tabbed into oblivion. I remember this book was so incredibly impactful to me. Opened my eyes to so much because I had never really thought about death row that much. Like obviously I thought some people probably deserved to die for what they've done, especially if they're like mass murderers. And, you know, to an extent, I kind of still believe that. But I do think a system of death row where you can never guarantee that you are putting the correct people on it can just not exist. Like, you cannot have a system where you don't know for a fact that you are killing the right person, and you can never have a system that will know for a fact that you're killing the right person. So this story just opened my eyes to so much and changed my perspective on so much, and I think everyone needs to read it. And very, very similar vein as well is The Sun Does Shine by Anthony Ray Hinton. This is actually an account by someone who was on death row wrongfully for like 20 to 30 years, and his lawyer eventually obviously was Bryan Stevenson. This one is really though about the depths and lengths that you can bring your mind, because this man rotted in prison for absolutely no reason and lost 30 years of his life for literally nothing, just because he was a black man that someone convicted for literally no reason. This is harrowing, but so good. Another memoir I have, and this is my favorite memoir of all time, although I've probably read under 10, is The Glass Castle by Jeanette Wall. This book is so well written, and this story is so insanely compelling. This follows Jeanette Walls, who nowadays is a successful like writer and journalist who went to Barnard College, and no one knew her story, but she grew up in the worst conditions in America. She basically grew up in like a garbage fire. Like literally her family was insane, and she had negative things, like nothing at all, just herself. And the insight she has in early chapters as like a 5-year-old, where she has to like make very adult decisions, is insane, and I'm not doing justice at all by speaking about it like this. You just need to read this book. It is so frustrating, it's so inspiring. I need to reread this so bad because I read this so many years ago, and like just talking about it like right now is making me want to read it again. Okay, next up is a bit of a different one. We have On Grief by Jennifer Senior. I read this recently. It's one of the Atlantic editions published by Zando Projects, and all of these books are super short. They're just republished journalism articles from the Atlantic. This one is actually a Pulitzer winner. It's about a victim of 9/11 and kind of a reflection on him and his life before that happened, and also on his parents and how they've reacted to it and how they're grieving, because they both grieve in very different ways. His father has become a 9/11 denier, or like truther, and his mother is just trying to deal with that and not wanting to like lose her husband in the wake of this tragedy. Very interesting, very good. Now, coming up is my favorite author of all time. And so this my favorite nonfiction book of all time? Maybe The Glass Castle is up there. But we have The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. This is also incredibly tabbed with my fancy gold tabs, which only John Green gets. This is just a collection of essays, which are also in video form or like podcast form, and they're just reflections and ratings. They're basically reviews, actually. He reviews just things in the world. The Anthropocene is the current like period of humanity that we're in. So like there'd be like the Neolithic age or whatever. I don't even know if that's humanity, but you know what I mean. This is like we're currently in the Anthropocene. So that's like humanity, right? This book is just him reflecting on things in life. So for example, there'll be a chapter on ginkgo trees. There'll be a chapter on a very specific soccer game that Hank Green was obsessed with and inspired by. There'll be a chapter on like sunsets, on the world's largest ball of paint, and they're just the most John Green things to ever exist, and everything he writes just brings me so much comfort and saves me from existential dread that I need it. He just makes you love life. He makes you appreciate everything, and yeah, sometimes he's a little sappy, sometimes he's a little pretentious, sometimes he is way more reflective than the world probably warrants, but so am I. So I love reading everything he writes, and this is no exception. Speaking of being overly sentimental, we have I'd Rather Be Reading by Anne Bogle. This book is just a book about why people love reading. And if you ever are in a reading slump or forget the joys of reading, just read this. Just read this. It'll take you 2 hours or less, I promise. And it will make you want to eat your entire library. It's just so comforting. It's so nostalgic. It's so great. It's so great. So great. Highly recommend. Okay, I'm trying to speed this up a little bit because it's getting a little crazy over here with just the books I've read already. Anyway, Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. I read this for a class. It's just good for helping you figure out what you want to do, your career, your adult life. That's all I have to say about that. This is just like kind of a little workbook situation. Good time. Okay, that is all for the books that I've read. I do have a few honorable mentions that I don't own, and they're not like favorites of all time, but I just want to mention them really quick. Invisible Child by Andrea Elliott. This also won the Pulitzer Prize. It's great. It's about like homelessness in New York City. Beautiful Boy by David Sheff, a memoir about the father of Nick Sheff, who was a drug addict, and it's the movie with Timothée Chalamet. Obviously, that's why I've read it, but great memoir. Small Fry by Lisa Brennan Jobs. This is a memoir by the daughter of Steve Jobs, reflecting on her time being the daughter of Steve Jobs, and also how horrible of a parent he was, but also it's unflinchingly honest and kind of paints herself in a negative light as well. Then I have The 57 Bus by Joshua Slater. This is a young adult nonfiction book about this just like weird crime that happened. But I read it in one sitting and remember it being incredible. Alright, now, this is the exciting. This is when I get to talk about the books on my TBR. First section I have is Outer Space. So we have The Universe in Your Hand by Christoph Galford. I have no idea what this book is because I bought it in a random bookstore in Massachusetts, and I remember that very specifically. I actually have read 88 pages of it back in the day when I bought this, and it was really good. But sometimes when I read about space too much, it kind of like freaks me out. But at the same time, like I really want to know more about it, so I think that's why I stopped at the time. But what I do remember is that this is kind of told from a very like magic school bus perspective, where it'll be like, you're laying down. You are now launching into space. You are now flying through the Milky Way galaxy. So it's a very like personal and human perspective that's easy to understand, but it also includes the physics and math. Like it doesn't shy away from having the actual metrics. So that's interesting, but it's also like kind of funny, and I do want to legitimately finish this one day. The other space book I have and have yet to read, although I've read certain sections, is A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. This also includes The Universe in a Nutshell. It's like a double edition, and it's really pretty and has illustrations. This is the illustrated edition, which I could not resist buying from Barnes & Noble. The back is also cool. I love Stephen Hawking, have been interested in him since the movie The Theory of Everything, which is probably kind of cliche, but that's how it is. This is just a really pretty edition. It just talks about everything that we know about about space and the universe currently, and it does it from a pretty easy to understand perspective. Again, there are figures and numbers in here, but Stephen Hawking was a great writer and a brilliant man, and I think I should read this finally, eventually, when I get less scared. So this will happen. This will happen soon. Speaking of all the fun numbers of the world, we have Humble Pie by Matt Parker, also known as When Math Goes Wrong in the Real World. I love Matt Parker. He's a YouTuber and mathematician who just makes really interesting math videos and coding videos sometimes. And this is just gonna be like a little journalistic mathematical account of incidents in real life when people were very wrong about math and caused funny things to happen. Like I think I read the opening chapter of this actually a long time ago, and it was about like some contest where they vastly underestimated how easy it was to win the contest by like the number of things you had to do or whatever, and so then like everyone was winning and it caused a problem, right? So that's just like a really small example, but I think they will get much more intense, and I think it'll be funny because Matt Parker himself is hilarious. I'm excited to read it. Also, I made my friends buy it who also really like math, and we're gonna probably read it together and discuss the chapters. Like the whiteboard will be coming out at some point, and I'm 100% sure of that. Okay, another topic which I'm really interested in general is just like corruption. I really like dirty money scandals. I've watched most episodes of the Netflix series Dirty Money, which are just a docuseries about corrupt business practices. I've watched every single documentary about multi-level marketing schemes you could possibly watch, and now I think it's time for me to get into the pharmaceutical industry. So we have Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe. It's the secret history of the Sackler dynasty. And I've heard nothing but incredible things about this book. She's chunky, so I'm a little bit intimidated, but I've heard this is like so eye-opening and terrifying, and if I'm interested in corruption, like I need to read this. I've gotten like a glimpse into the pharmaceutical industry by a few episodes in Dirty Money, but like this needs to happen. Okay, let's make things a little bit less scary and depressing and move on to my writing craft books. I actually haven't read many writing craft books. I feel like I've maybe read like one or two when I was younger, but that's specifically for like young people writing, but I am an aspiring writer, so I do think I need to get into reading entire books about writing. I've only read everything on the internet about it, but I think it's time for me to get to On Writing by Stephen King. My friend Morgan is obsessed with this book, probably rightfully so. I mean, I love Stephen King, and he writes. So how bad could this be? I just get intimidated in my head about reading about writing, because I'm like, oh, I should be writing, and then crisis. Anyway, I'm gonna read this eventually. And on that subject, I also recently just bought Save the Cat Writes a Young Adult Novel. Save the Cat is what I use for everything. The normal Save the Cat. The beat sheets, the structure, I live and breathe and die by Save the Cat. But I'm writing a young adult novel, and this book finally just came out on specifically how to do it for a young adult novel, and there was a deal I got in my newsletter from Save the Cat that if I bought this at the specific time that I did, I would get free beat sheets for 1 million other young adult books. So now I have like 1 million beat sheets I can refer to if I need to. I also have the actual book itself, and I'm definitely going to be referring to this for specific beats in my story because, girl, once I get past Act 1, I am lost in the sauce. Like, I need help, and this is gonna help me. Next up, we have Reading People by Anne Vogel, the same author as the Why I Love Reading book that I showed you before. But this one is actually about seeing people and their personalities and like analyzing people from afar, which I do at all times. I think that this like more concrete perspective would be interesting to me. I don't know, I just love observing. One of my favorite pastimes is people watching and eavesdropping, so I think this will personally be very fun and exciting. Next up, we have 2 more of the Atlantic editions. This one is called Aunt Nobody Famous. There's just 2 random women's lives in their like early 20s in New York, and I'm like, well, me and you, we got some stuff in common, and this just sounds fun. It's about like their weird dinner parties and adventures they've gone on, and just fun reflections. It says, guesting, gossiping, gallivanting. What more could you ask for? And the other one is On Womanhood by Sophie Gilbert, and this one is it's just on womanhood. I don't really know. These are really short. I don't want to know too much going in, but I've recently been like watching a lot of movies, reading a lot of books about like womanhood, feminism stuff, which like obviously I always am, but it's been especially on the top of mind recently, and I think this would be a good addition to that. Okay, next up, we're gonna bring the mood real down. I guess I should have probably put this closer to the John Green one, but we have This Star Won't Go Out by Esther Earle, and her parents, I think, as well. This is the girl who inspired The Fault in Our Stars. She was, I think, pretty active online, and that's how John Green knew her, and they were like friends or like had spoken online before, and she had cancer and died, and this is just like a lot of her journal entries and like photos and stuff that her parents kind of compiled together, and there's an introduction by John Green in this as well. And I don't know how or when I will ever read this, but like I feel like she deserves it, and it's always intrigued me. That's why I have that. And last, most certainly not least, is another nonfiction book. I've acquired very recently. And that is everything I know about love. Now this is the one that I don't want recommendations for. This is not something I would normally read, like where it's like self-help kind of reflection situation, but I've just heard that this one is so good. I've heard that Dolly Alderton is like, if you are a young woman, like you need to read everything she's ever written, and multiple of my friends have told me I need this. I know that this book is like just about love in general, from just like friendships, relationships, family, like literally everything, and that it's just like what you will need to hear, especially if you're like getting into adulthood right now. And literally all my friends have told me to read it, so here we are. Alright, I was gonna include a few more books that are on my TBR that I don't physically own, but we don't have time for that because this was enough. I think you can see my interests pretty clearly. I have interest in corruption, specifically business corruption. I like conspiracies. Well, not actually conspiracies. I like combating conspiracies and just studying why conspiracies happen. So I guess cults could also fall into that a little bit. I'm very interested in space and math. I'm interested in crime, but very specific types of crime. I don't want to just read any true crime book that ever existed. It's more cases that specifically interest me or reflections on why crime happens, that kind of thing. Oh, other topics though, I just thought of this, that I'm genuinely like searching for books about because I've seen every documentary about them possible, is the Barkley marathons or like any sort of ultra marathon situation. Not about how to do them or running, like I don't run. More of just like the survival story of getting through it. Like I'm big into that. Specifically the Barkley marathons though, because that involves like weird cryptic situations. Anyway, also mountaineering, caving. That includes cave diving and crack caving more than just normal spelunking. Survival, especially I've raised in mountaineering, but like survival in snow and mountains and climbing. Climbing's a big one. I've watched every rock climbing documentary that ever existed. Also like diving, not like cool diving, I mean like deep diving. That is also interesting too. Anyway, at this point I'm rambling and I need to stop. Those are the recommendations that I could possibly be looking for, but if you have any generally great nonfiction books, just leave them down in the comments below because I'll probably check it out in Goodreads. Thank you guys so much for watching. I don't know why you're still watching, but thank you for being here. Please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing for engagement, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!